Standard, joint, standard, joint.
Could you guys say 4681? No, just ask them what they want to put on speaker.
Hey, it's the only meeting with,
Oh my God, blow over.
yeah, I'll let them. Okay. 459, I'm on track.
I'm not waiting on that situation. You guys asked about it already? Or no, you might check the joint, man.
We have that.
Yeah, you, just tell them that I'm not gonna be available.
That's right, but it's 459.
This is called progression. I didn't give you again. So,
Okay.
yeah. Now, first I didn't hear it get slowed down, I was self-editing, I was nervous about that. Don't forget, you can hit that orange button on the radio. I've never done that before, but.
What is your own mind?
A lot.
Really? It doesn't go on.
Like, a lot. Like most of it. There was a motherfucker getting your hand, motherfucker with that. I thought it was one of you guys, sure.
Yeah, he was on the pretty much.
Maybe you can. My opinion, I think. It's just so clear, but you guys were obviously all open, you know. So, there was a whole lot of motherfuckers and then there was a your hand. But, it's kind of like a war.
It felt like it a little bit. And then that one dude kept coming and drunk with his dad, or he kept coming and walking, he'd walk out of the room, walk back. Walk right up on it. Yeah, and I pushed that, and I think,
Because I saw that go to my eye,
Yeah.
go back.
And every time he walked up, I
I
was
was
like,
like, he's gonna get a bunch of that.
he kept leaving the room, I think he's going to go get something, he's come back in there and try to help the boy out, you know, that's why I kept thinking, because he came in, that one time I shut my knee around the jaw, I think, or the drunk, his dad going home. But then he didn't want to get in trouble, so he played like he didn't know what was going on.
Because we're always bad guys.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I don't say that. They walked in, we called him, they got one, he had some shit. Goddamn, I think, he wants to play this guy, you know?
Bill? Better check. Man.
not possible.
I don't know how I wrote that down, but I assume it's for the cameras if we can.
Yeah, that was an accident, I think I leaned him.
There you go.
What was said?
I'm gonna, which one you lean on now? See if we can change that.
Okay, an accident, so that doesn't mean I know how to get him back on.
Sorry, it's kind of difficult for me. Tony, now. Chief, obviously you felt like it was a really long time between when they first used the force and when they came back to see it and check on us. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And is that the portion that you were talking about in your earlier testimony about that they failed to render the medical treatment that you envisioned in that policy?
I do, and as you saw in the video, Mr. Sanders even says, I don't know if they called or not. I mean, there was just a casual disregard for the welfare of this prisoner that we just smashed into the wall.
Did anything in that time frame also bug you?
Well, the number of officers in there were obviously several uninvolved officers in there, and then we go outside to have a conversation with prisoners inside.
Do you feel like the tone changed after they came back?
I don't know that it changed. They may have, well, we heard, I think it's Mr. Sanders that said we better go check on him. So I think they realized they've been gone a while, and they finally do go in. So from that perspective, I guess it did.
But as far as the medical aid portion, this video is what you relied on to not believe the internal affairs report, is that correct?
That's correct.
Because to you, this is what it is.
It's hard to dispute video.
And the same thing we went through on the use of force earlier, you felt like that force was not reasonable, is that correct?
Totally unreasonable.
Was not objectively reasonable?
Not in any way, shape, form, or fashion.
And out of the 13 or 14 factors, 13 of them leaned to unreasonable, and one, maybe if you argued it, leaned to reasonable, is that correct?
That's correct.
And this was definitely, in your opinion, abusive and improper treatment of a prisoner?
It was.
I don't want to play the whole thing again for you and have him go through it. I've been trying not to do that this whole time. Is there any particular piece of it that you want to show that you were upset about on pretty thing, or do you feel like you've already described that in your testimony?
Well, I think that again, the internal affairs record did not reflect the demeanor of Mr. Baker in the jail cell. I mean, it's very clear that he is in pain. He's not even looking at the door, let alone standing there ready to assault an officer. And I think it's crystal clear when you look at the video. And so I could see right away that did not match. The narrative did not match. Mr. Sanders' statement did not match. None of it matched. The internal affairs investigation appeared to try to say that he was about to attack somebody, and that's just clearly not on the video.
Could you tell that he was intoxicated?
Oh, sure.
I mean, keeps going back to the sink. I don't even tell how many times. Is that correct?
Right, you gotta be pretty drunk if you think something's gonna change between the last time you push the button and the next time. I mean, he obviously was intoxicated and obviously wanted water.
And he was obviously in a lot of pain.
He appeared to be, yes.
Did you see him grasp his head like this?
I did.
Bend over at occasion, kind of shake? He was, did you see that?
I did, I saw it all.
And he was obviously angry, there's no doubt about that. But was he expressing that anger towards any of those officers in a way that it was physical by any stretch of the imagination?
No. It was strictly verbal, and people do that all the time. And, you know, you tell police officers when they come into the academy, you know, you're you're gonna have to be thick-skinned, you're gonna run into idiots out there. They're gonna call you names, and they're gonna yell at you and do things, and we have to hold ourselves to a higher standard. Words aren't gonna hurt you.
And what about this idea that he was safe in that cell, and he wasn't trying to escape? Is that clear to you?
He was safe in that cell, he was not trying to escape, and the officers were safe because they were outside the cell.
So that conduct, as we talked earlier, is just completely unjustified under this standard.
That's absolutely
It's
correct.
about the third time we've covered this, I think.
Let's cover one.
Is there anything else you want to cover with this video, with the board?
With the video,
Yes, with it.
no, sir.
Is there anything else right now that you want to explain as far as the IA's conflict with this video?
No, other than, it's confusing to me, but I would not want the board to, but I want them to understand how difficult a job internal affairs is. And that on its face, when you read it, you'll see that it's completely defensive. But I don't hold that against those people that were trying to get through this. This was an extremely difficult investigation for them. And that's the only thing I'd add.
I have no further questions.
All right, being it's almost 1:45, I think we'll stop and take our lunch break. Now, how long do you think you need, Mr. Jansen,
For what?
for lunch?
Chief Burton, your mind was made up the second you watched the video, true?
As far as what I saw in the video, I could not imagine an excuse for it.
Okay. And you originally had no intention of even having an internal affairs investigation done, right?
No, I think it's been mischaracterized. I expressed my anger to some members of my staff and said that, you know, I can't imagine, I told them the same thing, I can't imagine, number one, why an officer would feel this was necessary, and number two, how could it ever be justified?
Okay. Well, on December 1st of 2011, you gave a radio interview to Tom Bradley. And he asked you if the police chief sees that, referring to the video, is his first step then to go get IA, Internal Affairs, and get them involved. And you told him, actually, in all honesty, Tom, my first reaction was bring Sanders in and terminate him. The Internal Affairs commander, who I respect, talked me down because, you know, when a police chief sees that kind of thing and I have to look 15, 20 days down the road, when the public's going to react to this, and if it made me sick to my stomach, I can just imagine what it would do to someone whose child may be sitting in a Boone County jail right now. So my first reaction was to get it done, let's end it early because there's no justification for this, there's no way I'm going to be able to explain this to the public. Those were your words, correct?
That's correct, and that's exactly the way I felt.
Exactly the way you felt. Your mind was made up the second you saw it.
I object to that characterization. That's not what he testified to.
What did he testify to then?
I think he
I
testified.
explained,
No.
I think what he testified to was, when he initially heard about it, that's how he felt. He was super upset. He says so, that's what he said, and then he got talked down, he did the right thing, and it happened.
I think you mischaracterized when you originally heard about it. It's when he originally saw it, isn't it?
Yes, but that's what he was referring to in that statement to the reporter. That's what he just read in.
That's correct. When he originally saw the tape, that he was ready to fire him.
Scott was insinuating that was a permanent reaction, not just that it was a temporary one to what happened when he saw it.
I didn't get that insinuation, so
I apologize.
overruled.
Well, Chief, before the investigation ever began, you took the video and you went to the city manager and you told him you were going to fire Rob, right?
actually, no, I just wanted to make sure that the city manager was aware of the severity of the incident, and that's my job as police chief, is to keep my boss informed.
But you announced to command staff that you were going to fire Rob, didn't you?
I don't recall doing that. I recall talking, just like I just told you, that I felt like it. When I saw the video, that's exactly how I felt. I don't deny that at all.
Okay. Now, the investigation commenced about I think it was about August 23rd of 2011. Is that, that's to your recollection?
I seem to remember the 21st for some reason.
I think maybe the first notice of investigation might have gone out on the 23rd.
Okay.
That's probably accurate. And then you added a charge of failure to provide medical attention under the use of force policy, correct?
Correct.
And then you added the corrective guidelines charge, abusive and improper treatment of a prisoner, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And that investigation ran its course, but you didn't see a thing, you couldn't comprehend of anything that would change your mind, isn't that true?
That's correct. Because from the very beginning, I was separating what happened in the jail cell from everybody else that was trying to include what happened at the house.
Okay. And you told that to Internal Affairs too, didn't you?
I probably did.
Okay. And in that same interview, radio interview, you said, during their investigation, did you think there was a chance that they could change your mind? We're referring to Internal Affairs. And your response is no, and I voiced that. I said, I can't think of a thing. I'm sitting here trying to think of something that would justify what happened in that jail cell, and I said, I just don't see it. Are those your words?
Yeah.
Okay. So the investigation runs, and you get a copy of it, and not just the report we've talked about earlier, but you got a copy of the full note, right?
Right.
Okay, and the report is part of it, but there's transcripts of interviews and literature and all sorts of stuff that makes up the whole volume of it, yes?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And the report is just, 39, 40 pages of it?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you read that over the weekend, yes?
Yes.
Okay, and you distributed it to the chain of command that weekend as well, correct?
Distributed, I'm not sure.
Make sure Sergeant Houston got a copy, Lieutenant Kelly got a copy, Captain Nelson got a copy, Deputy Chief Monticelli got a copy.
I don't recall how that went down, to be honest with you, sir. I don't remember.
But at some point, you asked them to take a look at it also, and you all would reconvene and talk about it.
Of course, yes.
Okay. And if that was a Friday, that occurred the following Monday, true?
If in fact those are the dates, yes, sir, that's what we would have.
And you acknowledge that the Internal Affairs investigation concluded that Rob acted within policy and procedure when it came to the application of force, yes?
No.
No, I'm saying, you agree that that's what they found?
Yes.
Okay. And you agree that?
No, I don't agree with that.
Okay.
What I agree is that they concluded that it was unfounded, which in fact means it did not occur, or that it was, the acts described did not occur, or they were misconstrued, which was impossible. That was an impossible conclusion.
Right, because you look at the video and you say that can't be anything but excessive force.
No, sir, based on the definition of what unfounded means.
Well, what's the definition of
The
unfounded?
definition of unfounded is, as I just told you, the acts did not occur or were misconstrued.
And so if and I don't want to argue semantics with you, but I want to make sure we're clear. If the act alleged is excessive force, then unfounded would be a proper way of saying excessive force was not used. Force was certainly used.
It would be, but what we're examining here is the force, and then whether or not that force is in fact acceptable according to policy and practice.
So is it your testimony that no force could have been used?
No, the force it would have to be investigated. The purpose of the Internal Affairs investigation is to determine whether or not the force that was used, because it's a fact, it's on a video, whether or not it met policy and procedure. If it had, then the proper disposition of Internal Affairs concluded that should have been exonerated. Because it's obvious it happened, it's on the video.
Well, it's obvious force was used, right?
That's correct.
It's obvious to you that it's excessive.
But what they were investigating was whether or not the force that was used was excessive.
That's what I just said.
Okay?
That's the allegation.
That's
Force
the
used
allegation.
is excessive.
Correct.
So if the definition of unfounded is the acts alleged did not occur, then IA is simply saying, we don't believe that the force was excessive.
They could be saying that, but if they did, they were wrong.
And that'll bring me just back around where we started, which is simply that You acknowledge that that was their conclusion. The force was not excessive. Medical aid provision of the use of force was not violated, and the abuse or improper treatment of a prisoner allegation. There was no abuse or improper treatment. Those were their findings.
I don't believe they concluded that at all. I think if they had, they would have exonerated.
Okay. This is your IA unit, right?
That's correct.
Okay, these are your hand-picked people.
Not exactly handpicked, sometimes they're assigned.
Okay. But in 2011, since you started this unit when you got there, they were there because you put it there.
That's not correct. Internal Affairs in Columbia Police Department started in approximately 2006. I didn't get here until 2009.
You're saying there was no internal affairs or professional standards unit before 2006?
That's my understanding.
Now, once the investigation was done and everybody had had a chance to read it, you all reconvened at some point, based on the timeline, I believe it's probably Monday, the 20th September.
Probably.
And the chain of command, with the exception of Lieutenant Kelly, who was out of town, agreed with you and made their recommendations that we saw in Exhibit E, correct?
Actually, they didn't agree with me completely. They agreed on 2 of the allegations, disagreed on 1, and they were all over the board as far as punishment.
Okay, I'm sorry, you're right. I mischaracterized the email. Sergeant Houston, reasonable force and abuse and proper treatment sustained, medical attention not sustained. Same for Captain Nelson and same for Deputy Chief Monticelli, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Houston 15 days, Nelson 15 days, Monticelli 30 days. Yes?
Correct.
Okay. But then your range of punishment that you put on the notice of remedial action was, I believe, 230 days? I'm sorry, that's not the notice of remedial action, I'm sorry, the notification of findings. Something like 230 days through termination, correct?
I don't remember the exact wording of it without looking at it.
Where'd you get the number 230, whatever it was?
I didn't. Internal Affairs would have, if they said a 15-day suspension, the, what was it, 15 days, 30 days?
What, Ben, just remind me, what?
What are you objecting to?
It's not what the exhibit says, it's actually, I think it's 15 days, I think it's so many hours and it tweaks.
That's what I was looking for. Right?
Okay,
What
and
exhibit is
maybe
it?
I just misread it because I've got the wrong document.
Sorry, we can find it.
Yeah, I'm sorry, 120 hours to termination. I'm sorry, Chief. I
That's okay.
All right.
Sustained.
And despite their recommendations, you ignored those, and it was your determination that he should be fired.
No, sir, I didn't ignore their recommendations. I evaluated their recommendations along with the other things that I had to evaluate, which was Mr. Sanders' previous disciplinary history. As I explained a little bit earlier, what I expected from him when he came for our meeting. And, you know, those factors, and I also evaluated what I thought his chance of success would be in the future with the police department based on everything I knew, so I considered everything.
And I need to back this up on the timeline. I misspoke, Chief. If Friday was the 16th, Monday was actually the 19th.
Okay.
True. And that's when they made their recommendations in that meeting, true?
Mhm.
Okay. And then you gave Rob the opportunity to meet with you to discuss with him your intent to fire him.
That's correct.
So you'd already, that was your decision at that point. And to be quite honest, if there was nothing Internal Affairs could say, there was certainly nothing Rob could say that would change your mind either, right?
No, that's absolutely incorrect.
And so then why, sir, on page 73 of the Black Book, did you have the personnel change form for termination begun on September 20th, which would have been Tuesday, the day before you met with Rob Sanders?
Expediency.
Because it was absolutely your intent to fire him.
It was based on everything I knew, and Rob was the only one that had the opportunity to change my mind, and he did.
And this is all in part based on his belief that he acted in accordance with policy and procedure, yes?
Believe in that he acted, I don't have a problem with him believing that, but not leaving any room for any training or anything we could have given him that would have explained to him that he had other options, that he put himself in that situation and didn't have to, and that, you know, if Mr. Baker was such a bad rat, we shouldn't have gone in there. I expect officers to use common sense along with the rules and regulations.
Sure, of course you do. But the standard of care is set by the rules and regulations, isn't it?
To an extent it is, but good judgment is also a part of that decision-making process.
And you say that you were okay with him believing he was in policy and procedure, but that he was not receptive to what?
He made the statement that he was right, everybody else was wrong. I did what I had to do, and there wasn't gonna be any change in his mind.
Well, you know, I was there for that, wasn't I?
Yes, you were.
I don't have any recollection of that.
I object to testifying to,
You are
want to get on the
testifying.
stand, I'll
You can
cross
ask
it.
questions all you want, but you can't testify.
It's your testimony that Rob Sanders said, I'm right, everybody else is wrong.
That's what I took away from the meeting,
That's
sir.
what you took away from the meeting?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So it's okay to believe you were right when other people believe you were wrong? True?
Absolutely.
Like, you believed you were right when you resigned from the Dallas Police Department under investigation for excessive.
When I resigned from the Dallas Police Department, yes, I was right.
Yeah. And you've been trying to get out of Dallas for a while anyway, right? That's why you quit.
I object. What does this have to do with this
I don't
case?
see any relevance to that. at all.
It has to do with, the image doesn't always tell the whole story.
It's not included in our packet, and we can't discuss anything that's not in there.
Okay, fair, fair. So the meeting occurs on the 21st of September, which is a Wednesday. You called him that afternoon and told him he was fired, yes? Or-
I think I remember calling him, yes.
Okay. You told us earlier you didn't want to delay it, right?
That's correct.
Okay. And then you went and held a press conference and you showed the video and said, I'm not going to tell you his name, but I terminated him.
I don't know that that's the way it went down, but we did have a press conference.
That afternoon, yes.
Okay.
How many times have you called a press conference to announce the termination?
That would be one.
This one? Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about the allegations themselves. I think I heard you to say that you agreed it was the practice of the police department to handcuff people to the ring if they were banging on the cell doors.
Yes.
Okay. And I think I heard you to say that it was the practice of the police department to use force against those people if they wouldn't voluntarily go sit down by the ring.
I don't believe I said that.
You don't believe so? Okay, well, would you agree with me or not that it was the practice and custom of the police department to use force against people if they refused to voluntarily go have a seat?
Reasonable force, yes.
Okay, and in fact, that whole issue was debated amongst command staff, wasn't it? Not before any of this happened.
What issue?
The whole issue of rings in the jail cells.
Actually, no, those weren't removed until after.
I understand they weren't removed. My question is, the issue was discussed before this whole Rob Sanders incident happened among command staff.
If it was, I don't recall what the context of it would have been.
Well, isn't it true that you had the opportunity to change the policy and you chose not to?
I have that opportunity every day.
Well, I'm specifically talking about the issue of using force on people with respect to the handcuff ring in the jail cells.
I don't know that it ever came up that the policy needed to be changed. It's only when it becomes abusive that it becomes a problem. And most of the people that got handcuffed to the chain, to the ring, did not end up in the emergency room. This one did.
And many, many people have been handcuffed to those rings, right?
Correct.
And many of those people have had force used against them, correct?
Very likely,
And
yes.
a variety of different methodologies of force.
I would agree.
And you've signed off on many of them as the final level of review, true?
I would agree.
And you understood that was the standard response when somebody was banging on the cell door.
I understood that we used the ring. I do not recall understanding that anytime somebody had knocked on the door and asked for water, that they got put on the ring.
Well, You've seen the video, he's more than just knocking on the door, isn't he?
He's banging on the door.
Banging on the door.
It's a metal door, yeah.
Okay.
And
But,
nobody's responding to it.
but in the history of the police department, okay, it was common practice to use the latches and just the latches, right?
We found out during this investigation that it was.
Yeah. That's not some isolated incident where Rob Sanders only flipped the
No,
latch.
it's not.
Okay. And it was, the reason the police department had that practice of putting people on the ring and using force if they wouldn't do it voluntarily was because there was a history of those people, whether they meant to or not, and whether they wanted water or were being jerks, they were damaging those latches, weren't they?
The latches that shouldn't have been used in the first place as the security device, yes.
And I'm sorry, when was the directive sent out that you are no longer to just use the latches, you are supposed to find a key and lock the door?
It was post Rob Sanders.
And in fact, as you just mentioned earlier, the rings came out of the cells post Rob Sanders.
That's correct.
And then, in fact, you essentially stopped using the holding cells as much as possible. The directive is get them to county as fast as possible.
Correct.
Okay? And you also directed that there be training on cell incursions, didn't you?
Yes, along with riot training and a couple of other things.
Okay, and do you know, prior to that training on cell incursion, what happened after Rob Sanders got fired, when it was the last time anybody had done any training on going into cells?
I have no idea.
Now, in your view, Internal Affairs botched this investigation, yes?
I wouldn't say botched, I said, I thought that they allowed personal feelings and relationships to cloud what they were actually there to do, which was be a fact finder, and went about trying to justify Mr. Sanders' actions.
So in the past, you've said it was botched, right?
I don't use the word botched very often. If you say I did, I guess you've got evidence of it.
Well, that same radio interview,
Uh,
I'm sure it's the right one. Yes, December 1st, 2011.
I object to this radio interview. How do you even know it's accurate?
I've
Where's the
asked him
foundation
if they're
for
his
it?
words.
Well, do you have a transcript?
I did.
Presented that to the council over there?
I have not, but it's not an
See it?
exhibit, and
I want him to show the words to at least the chief, so the chief can see if he recognizes his own words or not, if he remembers or not.
I'm happy to do that, and this is simply an excerpt from that transcript, Chief. If you'll take a look at line 5, do you have any recollection of saying that in that?
I don't have any recollection, but if it's in this transcript, then I would stipulate that I probably did say that.
So that is a word you think you may have used in regard to this internal affairs investigation, that they botched it.
Yes.
That it was essentially just a justification to try to protect an officer.
Yes.
Okay? A justification so that the public could be spoon-fed something.
I don't know about that.
Well, you talked about you think they saw the embarrassment that was coming, right?
Yes, I think I
Okay.
did.
And that they fashioned this report to try to stave off that embarrassment.
Yes.
And that you said the integrity of the investigation was compromised. You said that today, do you recall that?
I believe it was.
Then you also didn't then ask somebody else to come do the investigation, like the county or the highway patrol, did you?
No.
You said that, well, let me ask you this. In your eyes, you use these terms, unnecessary and unreasonable. To you, those are essentially interchangeable. To you, it was unnecessary to go in, therefore it was unnecessary to deliver any force, right?
It was unnecessary to go in, therefore any force used once you did go in was unreasonable.
Okay. And there's that, and I think we said the same thing in opposite directions, but because it's unnecessary in your view, any force was unreasonable.
No, that's not true.
Okay, then for me, please explain the distinction.
Okay. If the intent was to put the person on the ring, which was policy and practice, or whatever you want to call it, in the past, I don't have an issue with that at all. You just don't have to bounce them off the wall first. You just go in, you take, one officer takes one arm, another one takes another arm, We do it all the time. We do it without bouncing people's head off the wall. So if you went in there and you took control of the situation, that's use of force, and that would have been perfectly justified to put them in on the ring.
So let me make sure I understand. When you say unnecessary, what are you talking about?
I mean, it wasn't necessary.
Are you talking about the force, or are you talking about going in?
Both.
Okay.
If the officers determined that it was appropriate to go in, then there was a certain level of force that would have been perfectly justified.
Well, are you saying that it was or was not a permissible action for Rob Sanders and the other two fellows to go in there that night?
It was permissible, but it was not necessary.
Okay. And so, if it was permissible, then the question is really whether the force delivered was excessive or not.
No, it's a question of judgment, in my opinion.
Question of judgment. Okay. Let's talk about the retaliatory part of it that you described. If I recall correctly, your logic is that Rob makes a comment about he lost round 2, which in your mind is a retaliatory sort of a statement, yes?
Yes.
Okay. What else did you consider with this notion of retaliation?
Well, it appeared to me that he was trying to impress the younger officers. And that's just a personal opinion.
With the comment?
With that comment, the whole swagger, I mean, you know, I had to look at that this wasn't even his prisoner in the first place.
That's right.
And, you know, he offered to involve himself. And then, once he did,
Well, wait,
made
hold on.
some bad judgment.
He was ordered to involve himself by Sergeant Buck, wasn't he?
I don't know about that.
At
What I
the
It's
what I
not
recall
something
is
that
that he
witnesses
was,
I'd like to
Yeah,
check.
let him finish.
is that he didn't do anything in the scene except see the other officers. There was another officer assigned to transport. And so I'm not even sure why Mr. Sanders went to the jail.
If I were to represent to you that he went to the jail because Sergeant Buck said, hey, can somebody follow him?
Great.
Would you have any reason to disagree with that?
No, I don't have any problem with
So
that.
it's not that he interjected himself in the situation, it's that he became involved in the normal course of his duties.
To the following of the jail, I would agree with you. Once Mr. Baker was taken to the hose and all of that, that was initiative set out by Mr. Sanders.
So do I understand that had he just followed into the garage and let Officer Kreitz, who did transport him, just stick him in a jail cell, that would have been just fine?
Well, the Officer Kreitz would still been bound by the policy that we need to get the subject water and all that, so my assumption would be he would have done something similar to what Officer Sanders did.
All right. The round 2 comment, though, in your experience, what, 32 years, have you ever heard an officer use sarcasm or humor after a tense situation?
Of course,
And have you ever done it yourself?
probably.
Have you ever referenced a fight as a South Dallas slobber knocker?
Nope.
What did you call
We called fights, if you're referring to the lateral vascular neck restraint, that was called the South Dallas snot something or other.
it? I had my slobber phrase wrong.
Right. And it was a terminology, a slang terminology that was used by Dallas officers to characterize the lateral vascular neck restraint.
Because sometimes cops talk in slang.
Sure.
Okay. And sometimes they're sarcastic guys.
Sure.
Did you watch the video from the patrol car that showed Rob actually washing Mr. Baker's
Yes.
face and eye? When did you watch that?
I don't recall. I would imagine it would have been right at the beginning when the investigation was turned over to me.
Now, you also talked about this, the water comment, the water issue. Do you acknowledge that the water was off in that cell?
I don't know. I can't testify that it was. I'm assuming it was based on what I see on the video.
Okay. Now, Mr. Baker, you said he went to the sink a few times and I think it was at least attributed to Albert Einstein, that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. Made a comment about him keeping going back to the sink was a sign of intoxication, yes?
Yes, and I also think that he may have believed that the officers had a way to turn the water on for him, and that they were doing it, he was going back to check. That's kind of what I took away from it.
But it's not within Rob Sanders or any other officer's purview to figure out how to get the water on if it's off, correct?
No, not at all. That I know of. I don't even know how it works in the jail cells. I can't testify to that.
Okay, and so where's the nearest water that someone could wash their face off with?
Probably in one of the other cells, or back at the hose.
Okay. And so is it your expectation that officers are going to just continually offer this person whatever they ask for?
Not at all.
And did you actually hear what Rob Sanders said to Mr. Baker?
No, I couldn't on the video.
And so you don't have any idea what the tone was that he said it with?
Nope.
You don't have any idea what his actual language used was?
I'm assuming we're still talking about
The water from the toilet.
water from the toilet, okay. Yeah, I don't know the context.
Now, this policy about medical attention, and let's separate the whole issue about abusive and improper treatment, but strictly medical attention under the use of force policy. Section 8.1 under subsection Roman numeral 3. Officers should make appropriate medical aid available to any person who is injured, who lost consciousness, or who claims to have been injured as a result of the actions of an officer, or who has ingested some item that could be presumed to have or could cause injury. Tell me how Rob Sanders violated that policy.
My instincts tell me that Mr. Baker lost consciousness. He was obviously laying on the floor, not moving there for several minutes. It appeared to regain consciousness.
Is it your contention that they didn't call for medical assistance?
It's my contention that they were not attentive to it. You see the officer calling, you see Sanders say use the radio if necessary, but 12, 13 minutes later, they come back in and ask if medics have been called. Another officer asked Mr. Sanders, who actually inflicted the injury, if medics had been called, and he said he didn't know.
Well, do you remember on the video where one of the officers, it's actually Matt Hitler, is saying, pick up the phone?
Yeah, he's talking to the joint, that his joint is currently busy and can't answer the phone.
Right. And so he then said, nobody's answering. And Rob said,
Use the radio or call
call the front desk. And so Hitler called the front desk, right?
Right.
And he asked for a medic.
Called the front desk, and it took a while for them to answer, if I recall correctly.
Okay, and that's not Rob Sanders' fault, is it?
Nope, not at all.
Okay, and in fact, the radios don't work that great down there sometimes.
That's correct.
Do they? Okay, and so they asked for a medic as they were required to, yes?
I'm assuming they did. You don't hear that on the video.
But they're not medics themselves.
They're not.
There's nothing in the policy that says you even have to have basic first aid, right?
You talk
Training.
about officer, yeah, that's correct.
Okay, and so tell me how they did not, tell me how Rob Sanders did not make appropriate medical aid available to any person who is injured.
Because he left the room. He told them to call, but he didn't make sure of it. And in fact, was called, or asked about it 10 or 12 minutes later and was not sure they had been. An officer who has just injured a prisoner should care enough about it to say, are you sure the medics are around? I would have also been in the cell with Mr. Baker, as I previously testified, to make sure that he's not in convulsions or having trouble breathing or bleeding extensively or whatever, and we left him laying on the floor of the cell.
Well, he's being watched by the station master on the video, isn't
Allegedly.
he?
If you'll recall, the station master wasn't answering the phone either when they were trying to call, so
Okay.
I don't know how you could conclude that the station master was even at the front desk and able to watch.
Well,
That was an
the station-
assumption that was made on the part of the officer,
The station master answered eventually, didn't she?
eventually.
And tell me where in that policy officers are required to physically observe anybody who's injured.
Again, it goes back to how we treat human beings, particularly those we've just injured.
Well-
And what I would have done in that scenario is I would have picked up the phone and I'd have said, we're going outside, watch this guy on the monitor until the ambulance gets here. I would have taken more care than they did.
Okay. Well, I think now you're crossing over into abusive improper treatment justification. I'm talking about the use of force medical attention policy. This is what it says. Officers should make appropriate medical aid available to any person who is injured. Did they or did they not make appropriate medical aid available?
Eventually.
And you remember when Lieutenant Schaus-Jones read from Exhibit C, which is the memorandum that she prepared. It says the investigations revealed that officers do not receive any ongoing continuing medical training, and there is currently no policy that explicitly requires officers to render first aid or to observe a prisoner with potentially life-threatening injuries until medical personnel arrive. You got that memorandum, yes?
I did.
Now, there were two other officers with Rob at the time, yes?
That's correct.
These younger officers who he was trying to impress. And they were charged with failing to make medical aid appropriately available too.
Because they were there.
And they were exonerated.
Right.
Okay. And by definition then, that must mean that they didn't abuse or improperly treat a prisoner as well, right?
Right. They didn't slam up against the wall.
Well, no, we're talking about medical aid now. You said that under abusive and improper treatment of a prisoner, basic human dignity requires you to stay with them and watch them and make sure they're okay. That's what you testified to.
That's correct.
So why didn't those two officers get rung up for that either?
I have to look at the reports that came back on them. The ultimate decision is that they didn't hurt him. The primary responsibility for making sure that the prisoner was taken care of fell to Mr. Sandy.
So it's apparently your testimony that basic human dignity only applies to the senior officer.
Not basic human dignity. Back to the policy again. It's just the medical care. I want the same medical care for Mr. Baker in that jail cell that officers would have provided on the street if they got a call for a man down and had the identical injury. Officers would not call medics and then walk off and assume the medics were going to show up. They would stay there with that victim. Why is it any different in a jail cell, particularly when we inflict the injury?
Well, you've asked me the question, so I'll answer it.
Okay.
Because they're in your police department and they're not out on the street.
Okay,
And there's a room right next to it, and there's a station master watching on
in our
there.
custody and in our control and we're responsible for their care.
And you saw that a medic did arrive, yes?
Eventually.
Okay. And it's not Rob Sanders or anybody else's fault that it takes them a while to get there, right?
Actually, I think they came to the door and couldn't get in. So that was Rob Sanders' fault because there was nobody there to let the medics in.
Ah, I see. Okay. You know what? I think, Chief, I don't have any further questions.
Redirect.
Chief, I'd like to go back to this personnel change form, and the date prepared date was September 20, 2011, but what was the date that you actually signed it at the bottom?
And I didn't bring my readers with me. It looks like September
23rd?
23rd.
So the form gets prepared so paperwork is ready one way or the other.
That's correct.
You have the meeting, and it's actually a day later that you sign the form after you make your decision. And you actually gave Rob verbal notice before that, is that right?
That's correct.
And the HR paperwork took a long time to get from your office over to HR and then to Rob.
That's correct.
Okay, so the bureaucratic paperwork does have to be shuffled.
It does take time, that's right.
When you were asked about this retaliatory force and the guess who won round 2, you didn't think it was a joke, did you?
No, sir.
You felt like that was retaliatory.
I did.
I also want to go back to Exhibit 22, Section 4. Back to this idea of gratuitous force. Will you read that again?
Sure, gratuitous force. Officers may not use any degree of force against the suspect once the suspect has been restrained, is no longer resisting, and is not a threat to the officer or others.
And we went through this before, none of those qualify in this instance, isn't that right?
The acts performed by Mr. Sanders were grossly gratuitous based on this definition.
So based on that definition though, they never needed to go in there because he was already safely tucked away and restrained.
That's correct.
So there's multiple things that were unreasonable. It wasn't just a shove, right?
That's correct.
Your original, I think, stance, and I think it gets kind of twisted around, is it was also unreasonable for them to even go in and do that.
Let me see if I can give you an example.
Okay.
I'm aware of an incident back in Texas where a police pursuit occurred. And the suspect vehicle went into a cul-de-sac, and the officers chased this person into the cul-de-sac. One of the trailing officers in this pursuit stands in the middle of the street on a cul-de-sac, waits for the suspect to circle and come back out, and shoots and kills the man through the windshield. Absolutely no necessity to put yourself in harm's way. Absolutely none. You can step up on the curb, let the guy go. I mean, you're not going to stop him with, all he's doing right now is running from the police. It was for a traffic violation, by the way. And that's what I thought of when I saw this. Why did we have to go into that jail cell? We didn't have to. We were that concerned with what Mr. Baker was going to do to us. We did not have to. And as I said before, time was on our side. We could have called the SWAT team if we thought we needed it. The simple reality is we did not need to go into that cell. The man simply wanted water. Don't want to give him water, don't go in there. Let him holler. But if you're going to go in there, you have to take responsibility for what you do.
And that gratuitous definition there, that leads into your other regulations, about reasonableness.
That's correct.
Unreasonable use of force.
That is correct.
Okay.